Hey everyone, welcome to my channel. If you're a returning subscriber, thank you so much for coming back. But if you're new here, my name is Wendy, aka the Thrifty Sewist. I do sewing tutorials and cash stuffings on my channel. Now, you're obviously here for something related to sewing, so you might be like, what is a cash stuffing? Well, I really encourage you to check out my other videos. It is super fun. It is a budgeting method that literally has changed my life, and it might change your life too. So, check out some of my other videos if you're interested in what cash stuffing is. But for now, let's talk about this video. So, today I'm going to show you how to make this applique embroidery on an embroidery machine. Let me zoom you in so you can see it closely. So this is a shirt I made for my daughter. Her name is Ivy. This font is called Christmas Applique Alphabet. It is by Designs by Juju, and I will link it below. And I'm sorry for the shakiness. I am holding the camera right now. But yeah, so you can see that the letter I is a little snowman. We have the letter V in the holly leaves and hollyberry. And then the Y is basically whatever you want. It's just a little Y with a scarf. So, super, super adorable. And if you're wondering, the name of this shirt pattern is called the Piccadilly Pullover. It is by Peekaboo Pattern Shop. And if you're wondering how to sew it up, I made the women's version of this pattern, which is called the Pemberley Pullover. I did a tutorial on it here on my channel. I will go ahead and link that tutorial right up here in the corner for you if you're interested. The construction method is exactly the same for the kids version as it is for the women's version. All right, I think that's it. Let's go ahead and get into the tutorial. Alright, so here is the software that I use for embroidery. It's called Embroidery Essentials, and it's this yellow square icon with the needle right here. And they do have different versions of this, or versions isn't the right word. They have like several, I'm trying to think of how to describe this. They have like different parts of the software that you can kind of build on. So this is, I believe, the most basic. Then they have like a next level that does more things, and then another one that does more things. I'm not sure how many they have total, but you have to buy each part. But the Essentials is good enough for me. It's all I've ever needed. You know, I don't do a ton of embroidery, so it's good for me. There is a learning curve to it, but I'm not going to show you really how to use this because there are a lot of videos out there. And I mean, even I'm not a pro with this. So I just really quickly wanted to show you the software though. So I already have my font laid out here. You can change the size of your hoop. I'm going to be using a 5x7 hoop today. You can change your background color if you would like. A lot of things in here. And what I use this for is to lay out my design in the hoop and make sure it's centered, make sure everything fits. B, to change colors if I want it to. So like this Y was originally a different color, and I changed it to purple. Now, the thing is, it doesn't matter what color this is on the computer because you're going to be putting the thread in the machine, and you can put in whatever thread color you'd like. However, I like to change the colors to as close as possible because that just helps me visualize it more, how it's going to look once it's stitched out. So that's totally up to you if you want to, you know, even bother changing the colors in here or not. Another thing that you can do in here is you could add stops. And without going into too much detail, a stop is basically you can tell the machine to stop stitching so that once again you can change the color in a section that maybe the color is the same. So you're basically editing the design. That's not how it was originally made, but you can add those stops there if you want to change colors. I hope that makes sense. That was a little bit tricky to explain. But that's another great thing this is used for. There are a bunch of things, but again, I'm not really going to go into detail. I just wanted to show you, like I said, the software basically. Okay, so this is my design. It's my daughter's name, Ivy, and it is an applique design, which is basically means I'm going to have fabric in all of these open areas that's going to be stitched down by the outside stitching. So enough talking. Let's go ahead and go over to the machine and I'll show you how to get started. All right, let's talk hooping. So I'm using a 5x7 hoop. There are a couple different methods to hoop. One is actually hooping your project and another is floating, which is what I'm going to do. So I'm going to show you that. So you will untighten your hoop. Mine has a screw down here, and take out your, I guess, inner portion. And then you want to put your stabilizer in. Now, this is an invisible mesh stabilizer. I got it on Amazon. I'm not going to go into which stabilizer to use because that is something you have to experiment with and figure out for yourself. But I'll tell you one thing that I learned when I was first starting with machine embroidery, and it's the saying, if you wear, don't tear. Meaning if you're using something stretchy, so a knit, don't use tear away, so use cut away. So I've always followed that and I've never had any problems. The only exception is if it's a woven, so something that doesn't stretch, so like a jean jacket or something out of just cotton woven fabric that doesn't stretch. I have used a tear away with good results. So again, you'll need to experiment yourself to figure out which stabilizer is best for you. There are, I'm sure, a million videos out there on YouTube that you can watch about stabilizer. But like I said, this is a cutaway. I got it on Amazon. You get a huge roll for not that expensive, at least last time I bought it. It lasts me forever because I don't do a ton of embroidery. So I will link this below. And I use this for literally almost every single project. I have a ton of different kinds of stabilizers. This is my favorite, and it's the cheapest. So what you're going to do is lay out your stabilizer big enough so that it overlaps the hoop, because don't forget, you're going to be putting this inner ring back in, and you want to make sure there's enough on the outside edges so that it holds. So like if I were to just put kind of the bare minimum, because I'm trying to save stabilizer, and then I put my ring back in, you can see that that's going to probably slip inside and not be good. So you want to have enough overlap. I would say a good at least ½ inch or so. Okay, so I like to just put it over my hoop like this just to measure. And then cut it out. Now, I'm going to use 3 layers of stabilizer. And when I was first starting out, I thought, wow, I don't want to do that. That's a waste of stabilizer, and stabilizer is expensive. Trust me, you're going to, waste more time and money if you have to redo the stitches because they don't come out good than if you just use the extra stabilizer in the beginning. So the more stabilizer, at least in my experience, again, I am by no means a pro with the embroidery, but this is what works for me. And the more stabilizer, the better. So I'm using 3 layers. If it was something super duper stretchy, I would even probably use 4. And I do have a little hack about how to save some stabilizer, which I will film a separate video for. But basically, I save all my scraps and I use my scraps. So I'll show you how to do that in a separate video. All right, so just have them all lined up. Make sure they all fit over the hoop. And then you're going to stick your middle ring, your inner ring back in. You'll notice there's some tension. If you have any like wrinkles in here or it's not flat, you just want to like kind of pull the outsides just to make sure that's tight. And then go ahead and tighten your screw as tight as it will go. And this now should be like a drum. I don't know if you could hear that. Let me put it by the microphone. So it's as tight as a drum. Okay, that's what we want. We don't want it loose. If it's loose, your embroidery is not going to come out good. Okay. All right. Another thing that you have to make sure is the way that you're hooping. Meaning, so this is how this hoop goes in my machine. It slides like this. And basically, I'm trying to think of how to explain this. You have to hoop your project or put your project on the hoop according to how it's going to stitch out. So if your project is going to stitch out this way, you have to make sure to put your project this way. If it's going to stitch out this way, you have to make sure to put it this way. I hope that makes sense. So yeah, so basically mine is going to stitch out this way because I'm using basically the hoop in landscape mode, if that makes sense. So this is how I'm going to hoop my shirt, okay? Now, here's my shirt. The first thing I did was I went ahead and pressed this with the iron right down the center to make a crease in the middle, okay? So you could see it. It's a really good crease. You can also mark this with a disappearing marking pen, but if you're giving as a gift, I don't always like to do that. I just do it with the iron and then that could be pressed out later. Another thing you could do is you could also, now this is obviously cut off at the bottom just because of the pattern that I'm using, but you could also fold up this way, match your center crease, and then make another crease here to make the center of your project. You just have to fold it up enough depending on where you want the center of your project to be, or the center of your stitching, basically. All right, so this is my secret weapon. Okay, it's called Vivilux 3-in-1 rechargeable laser. I got it several years ago. I don't know if they make it anymore. If they do, I will link it down in the description box below. And I love this. This is how I line up all of my embroidery. Here's what the box looks like. I believe it also came in a green option. This is the red. The red I felt like would just probably be a little bit darker and easier to see. But it does come with 3 different like tips. One is the crosshair, one is a line, and one is a dot. I always use the crosshair because we want the exact center. No batteries needed. Yeah, so it's rechargeable. I've literally never had to charge this thing ever, and I've had it for years. Now again, I don't do a ton of embroidery, but yeah. Okay, so that's that. And it also comes with these great stickers, which I don't even bother using anymore because I don't need them, but something you might want to use. So basically what you would do, just peel one off here, is looks like this, is you would line this up to your center. So wherever I wanted my center marking to be on this shirt, I would put here, and then you just make sure your dot matches the center of this. So I'm going to show you how I put this in the hoop, but you know, those stickers are there if you want. All right, so what I do is I just, the laser needs to be high enough. So I just kind of stack up a couple things on my table. I hope that you're going to be able to see this. Let me see if that's in frame. All right, so I stack it up, and then this is bendable, so you can kind of bend it wherever. Turn it on. And again, just kind of bend it so that it's straight. Just making sure you can see that. So here's my crosshair here. You know what, that should be a little bit easier to see. Okay, so next is floating this on the hoop. So I float almost everything. There are different schools of thought. Some people will tell you don't ever float, it's the worst thing ever. Some people will tell you they only float. I float almost everything. It's easier and faster, and it works just as well for me as not floating. So if you weren't floating, basically what you would do is when this inner ring is out, you would have your stabilizer lined up, then you would put this in the hoop and then put your inner ring in, and just make sure that your fabric is tight and wrinkle free as well. Floating, like I said, it's just easier and faster, so it's what I do. Okay, so I use this basting spray. I will try to link this below as well. It's by Spray and Bond. And I just spray a little bit on my hoop, and I probably use like way more than necessary, but I am who I am. All right, so I spray that in because I want my fabric to stick. Now, some people do a basting box, some people will pin it in. I just use the spray because I'm lazy and it works, okay? So you, again, experiment, find out what works for you. And then the next thing I'm going to do is line up my hoop before I even put my fabric in. So the hoop has 4 markings here that are helping you to line this up in the center. So what I'm going to do is match up these 4 markings with my crosshairs. If I could get my crosshairs more. There we go. Okay, so start by lining up these 2. And it doesn't matter if the hoop looks crooked on my table or anything like that. I don't care about that. All I care about is that the center of the laser is touching those markings. Okay? So now that I have these 2 lined up, but you can tell these 2 aren't, so I need to move this up more. And I'm basically just adjusting this until it's lined up. Okay, that's pretty good, but not good enough. So let me see if I can get this straighter. Okay, that's good enough to me. The lasers are touching all 4 markings, and that's what we want. So this part where the crosshairs meet is our center point. Now, I am going to line up this vertical line with the crease that I made in my fabric. Here's the thing. If you only do the 1 crease like I did, you have to judge how far up or down to put your shirt depending on where you want your embroidery. So, you know, you don't want your embroidery all the way at the top because you have to remember that you have seam allowance. So some of this is going to be sewn, okay? You also don't want it totally at the bottom. I mean, unless that's where you want your embroidery to be. It's up to you. So I'm just going to kind of lay this down, and I'm going to put it near the top, but not too close because I want that near the top of the shirt that I'm making. Okay, and all I'm doing is lining up that crosshair. I'm going to turn the lights back on so it's a little bit easier for me to see. I'm lining up that vertical crosshair line with the vertical crease that I made. Move it down just a smidge. Now remember, I do have basting spray on here, so it's a little bit sticky. But this is why I didn't press anything down yet, because I want to make sure that it's lined up before I press the shirt in to that stickiness. Okay. All right, so that looks pretty good to me. I'm just adjusting just to make sure that it's going to be flat and wrinkle free. And once I have it in a good position, I'm going to press it down. Okay. And I misaligned it, but that's okay. So that is how you float something in the hoop. Okay. Now you could add some pins here. I don't bother because I don't want to risk them getting in the way, but if you do them like in the very corners, as far in the corner as you can, you should be okay. All right, so that is how you float it in the hoop. Now let's go over to the machine and we'll get stitching. All right, so here is my machine. It is a Brother NQ1600E. I actually got it off of eBay. I was lucky to find it for a really good price, barely used. So don't discount eBay, but obviously you have to be super careful. Make sure you get an honest seller and all of that. Okay, so I'm going to turn it on. It's going to do its little thing here. Touch the screen. And now it's on. Now this is telling me, basically it's trying to recall the last design I stitched out. If I wanted to do that, I would click OK, because the great thing about this machine, and I'm sure a lot of machines, is if I was embroidering something and had to stop and come back to it at a later date, I could resume exactly where I was. You just want to make sure if you're doing that, that you leave the hoop in, well, you leave the project in the hoop. It's not going to let you leave the hoop in the machine, but leave the project in the hoop. So I'm going to say cancel because I don't need that. And I have my design loaded on a flash drive. Okay, there are some built-in designs, but yeah, my design is on a flash drive. The design is called Christmas Applique Alphabet. It is by Designs by Juju, and I will link that the design down below in the description box. They have a ton of cute designs, like a ton. But I find a lot of their stuff is kind of geared towards kids, or at least it looks a little bit kiddish to me. That's just my opinion. They have a ton of nice stuff, fonts, everything. So check them out. And they always have a sale constantly. So yeah, so Designs by Juju. So what I'm going to do is put my flash drive in. There's a slot. Let me move you. A slot right here. Okay. And a mistake that I was making with this is not giving this enough time to read. So when I first got the machine, I would put the flash drive in and immediately try it. Then you're going to get an error that it doesn't recognize it or something like that. So don't do that. So I stuck my flash drive in. I'm giving it a minute or so to kind of read the data. And that might sound like, oh, well, duh. But it was something I was doing. I was just trying to go too quick. And then I was getting an error and wondering why my machine wasn't reading my flash drive. So now it should be good, hopefully. So this button right here is the, I don't know, the button that you would press for your flash drive, okay, to access the files on it. And you can see here are my files. One thing I do with this is I try not to keep too much on the flash drive. This flash drive is dedicated specifically to embroidery files. And I try not to keep too much on it because I find if there's too much on the flash drive, then the machine won't read it as well. So that's just a tip. So here's my design. I'm just going to click it and click set. Let me actually see if I can zoom you in here. Okay, now I get all of these options. All right, now you can see that my design is going to stitch out facing this way. However, this is how we have it hooped. So if I were to just put this in the machine now and stitch it out, my design would be upside down, okay? So the first thing I need to do is rotate this. So I'm just going to click rotate, and I'm going to rotate it 90 degrees to be facing the correct way. So now I'm going to put my hoop right in the machine like this, and it's going to stitch the correct way. Okay, so click OK. All right, you could size it on here if you would like, but I sized it in the software, so I don't need to mess with any kind of sizing or anything like that. So the next thing I want to do is edit the end, or end the editing, and then this is super helpful. So this is where you can move the design up or down to make sure it's aligned where you want. And then this, I'm going to show you in a second, this will move the needle without stitching anything to show you exactly where the design is going to stitch. And then you can just make sure it's not going, off basically anywhere on your project that you don't want it to. So let me go ahead and get this in the hoop, or in the machine rather. Okay, so on my machine, now different machines are going to be different. This is a slide-in hoop. So we have this sort of lock here. So this lock has to be up, okay? And you're going to line up this like ridge with this right here, this opening. Make sure everything's under the needle. Line it up and just slide it in. I like to just kind of hold everything while I'm sliding it in, and then just make sure it's all the way in, and then press your lock down. Okay. Now you want to make sure everything's out of the way. If you have something that you're embroidering that's really long, sometimes I will kind of fold up. See if you could even see that. Kind of fold up my excess and like clip it or pin it. That's really not necessary with this shirt because it's very small, but just know that. Another thing is you want to watch this the whole time. So embroidery machines are really cool in that you could basically walk away and they'll do their thing. But if this gets caught under here, your whole project is going to be ruined. So just want to keep an eye on it. Make sure, this is still where it should be. Make sure there's nothing folded over and getting stitched down and all of that. So you want to make sure everything's nice and smooth. Okay. Now, what I like to do is I like to put my presser foot down just so I can get a little bit better of an idea. And if you can see here, hopefully you can, this is not in the center. So when I hoop my project, it should be in the center, but you can see that it is up above the center a little bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move this a little bit. Okay, so I'm going to go back. And these, can you even see this screen? No. Let me zoom you out a little bit more. Okay, so these arrows are to move it. So I know I need to move it slightly more towards me. Okay, so I'm going to move it down. And if you can see, as I'm pressing the arrow, the hoop is moving a little bit, okay? Now, you're going to be limited on how much you can move this depending on the size of your hoop because every hoop has, size limitations. So you want to make sure you line it up the best you can in the hoop first. Don't think that you can just put this in the hoop without lining up and then move it on here because you can only move it in very small increments, okay? I think I'm going to go one more. Oh, see, I can't. So that's as far as I can go, and that's good enough to the center to me. I think I'm going to move it up slightly though, and because I have this hooped, trying to explain this, because of the way that I have this hooped, in order to move the design up this way towards the neck, I have to actually press the left arrow. So you're just moving the arrow in the direction that you're looking at on the hoop. I hope that makes sense. I know that was like explained very badly, but I'm going to move my left arrow up a little bit, and it's moving my design up this way towards my neckline, okay? Because I should have probably hooped it up a little more. So I'm going to go probably up as much as this machine will allow me to, which is quite a bit, it looks like. That looks good because don't forget there's going to be seam allowance here. Okay, so the next thing I like to do is I like to simulate the stitching. So it's this like dotted square line button. Okay, now this is showing you that this is the center. It's in the center right now. So I'm going to just kind of press all of these buttons to see, just to get an idea of where it's going to stitch out. Okay, so if I press this, it's going to go to the top right corner, and see, that's too high. That's all the way up on the shoulder. So I'm going to go back, and I'm going to actually move this down again. Okay, so yeah, I don't want it all the way up there. It's way too high. Okay, So let me try that. Let me go back to the center. So this is where the center of my design is going to be. The top of my design is going to be right there, which looks good. And pay attention to this, not what I'm pressing here, okay? Then if I do this corner, my design, this is going to be the outer edge of the design where it's showing you. So it's going to come out all the way to there. If I go back to the other corner just to make sure that looks good. Okay. Then the bottom of my design is going to come down to about there. Sides, bottom corners. Okay, so everything looks good to me. So I'm going to put it back to center and click OK. Now I'm going to lift my presser foot up. And we're ready to stitch. So press embroidery. And here we go. Now, one thing I didn't understand when I was starting out about applique designs is they are created in such a way that it tells the machine when to stop stitching so that you can lay your fabric down and all of that. Okay, so I thought you can do like any design as an applique, which I'm sure you could. You could probably edit it in software and add stops and things like that. But when you're buying a design, you are specifically buying an applique design. Okay, so when you're looking through your designs, if it says applique, it means that it's an applique design and you would put fabric under the stitching, if that makes sense. Okay, now you can choose to not put the fabric if you want. That's completely fine. But most people, you know, like the look of fabric. Okay, so because of that, you're going to see, so this is the screen that shows me the order of my stitching. Okay, this tells me this design has 10,687 stitches. I've stitched out 0 of them so far, and it tells me it's going to probably take about 32 minutes to stitch out. Take that with a grain of salt, because depending on how fast you change your thread and all of that, how fast you have your speed set on your machine, this could change. Applique designs are pretty time consuming with a single needle machine, because you have to keep taking it out, putting your fabric on, changing your thread, all of that. So, okay. And then this is the order of my stitching. Now you can see I have a light pink, a dark pink, a light pink, a dark pink. That's because the first stitches are placement stitches, okay? And what a placement stitch is it's just going to stitch basically the outline of the design on your fabric just to show you where to put your applique fabric. So the color doesn't matter, because the color is going to be overlapped anyway with your actual stitching. I just wouldn't use anything really dark, because that might show through, but I have a super light pink in here, so that's what I'm going to use. So I'm going to put my presser foot down. You'll see my button turned green, and all I'm going to do is press go. Okay, so here we go. So it's going to move to where it needs to, and it's going to stitch out that placement stitch. All right, so once it's finished stitching, I'm going to take the hoop out. Okay. Oops, sorry. And as you can see, here's my placement stitch. Again, super light color, just so that when I actually do my real stitching, that this color doesn't show through. But now this is exactly where I want my applique fabric to be. So the eye is a little snowman. I'm going to use something white. Let me grab that and I'll be right back. Here's my fabric. Okay. You want to make sure that anything that you're using for applique is wrinkle free. This obviously has a lot of wrinkles, but I'm only using a very small portion of it. So what you want to do is you want to cut your fabric so that it is slightly larger than whatever shape you are appliquing. Okay, you don't want to cut it too small, because then you'll be missing sections out of your shape. So I like to just kind of lay it over the design and then just use my scissors to kind of make a general guideline here, and then I could just finish cutting it out like this. Okay. Now you can see that the selvage is in there. It doesn't matter because I'm not going to lay that part in my letter, but I could cut that off if I needed to. So all you're going to do is you're going to just lay that fabric right over your piece. Again, make sure the entire placement stitch is covered. If you have it, like this, where there's an open area, then there's going to be an open area in your final project. So you want to make sure the entire placement stitch is covered. Just folding my selvage up to make sure the selvage is not in there, and it's not. And that's all you do. You just lay it on. Now, I do not recommend using basting spray to hold this down, because when you trim this, you're going to have a sticky shirt underneath. I made that mistake a couple times and I won't do it again. You really don't need it. If you want to use a little bit of spray, do that at your own risk. I do not recommend it. That basting spray is like impossible to get out, even in the washer, even with, I literally took a toothbrush one time and scrubbed it with, I forget what, alcohol or something. It just doesn't come off. Okay, so try not to use basting spray. All you need to do is really just lay that on there. All right, then we're going to go back to the machine and put it in the machine again. All right, so when you're putting this in the machine, again, just make sure your little lock is up. Slide it in. Now, the other thing is, once you've practiced this a couple times, you actually don't even need to remove the hoop from the machine to put your fabric on. You can just cut a square of your fabric and just lay it over without removing the hoop from the machine. I just wanted to show you to make sure you cut your applique fabric large enough, okay? And it's easier to do that when the hoop is out of the machine. All right, so the hoop is in the machine. Now, before you click go again, you want to make sure that this fabric is still over the entire shape. Okay, so make sure everything is covered. Put your needle down and press to go again. Now, I'm still using the light pink. This next stitch is just a tack down stitch, so it's just going to trace that same shape again and basically just tack down this fabric. So it's still okay to use a color that I don't want in my design. Okay, so I'm just going to press go. And the machine is going to do its thing. Again, with applique designs, because of the way they're created, the machine knows when to start and when to stop. Okay? Just kind of holding this just to make sure nothing wrinkles up. Just be very, very careful that you don't have your fingers near the needle. I don't recommend putting your fingers on here when the machine is stitching, but do as I say, not as I do. All right, and now that's tacked down once, I could let go. It's just doing another go around just to make sure it's really on there. And then once it's done with that, it's going to stop, and then we're going to trim our fabric. And that should have been cut. Sounds like there's a little bit of a bird's nest under there, which I want to take care of now before that causes problems later. And what I mean by that is if I take this out, see how there's kind of a big nest of fabric or of thread there? I'm just going to kind of snip this off. Now, you don't ever want to really actually snip threads on the back of your project because that can cause your stitches to come loose, but because this project is barely started, I'm going to do it. I don't want this to later get caught in my needle plate here and then mess up my embroidery, which it still may do. So let's hope it doesn't. And then also, if you're doing this, just be very super careful that you don't actually cut through your stabilizer and then through your fabric on the other end. All right, it's still there, but hopefully we won't have an issue. All right, now we're gonna go and trim this fabric. All right, so here we have our fabric. I know that there's a huge mess here in the background. Don't mind it. I have some Etsy orders I'm working on, and also my daughter's 20 months old, and my craft room is also my office, and she gets into everything. So I end up piling stuff just anywhere where she can't reach it, and then I have to clean it up later. So yeah, everything's just a big mess right now. Okay, so for trimming, I recommend these scissors. They are curved embroidery scissors. So if you could see, they're not straight. They have a slight curve. And the reason for the curve is that when you're, trimming, so that you don't get the fabric underneath, basically, and cut it. So what I recommend, let's see what kind of camera angle I could get here. What I recommend is putting your hoop on a flat surface, pull up your excess of your applique fabric if you can, and you want to cut as close as possible to the stitches, but not through the stitches, because then your stitches will fall out. Okay, and I like to turn the hoop as I'm going to make it easier on myself. And this is why the curve comes in handy on these scissors, because it's easier to kind of get underneath it. And I will link, oops, sorry, I bumped the camera. I will link these curved scissors below on Amazon. Just go slow, just be careful. Like I said, you don't want to get any of your fabric underneath. You only want to trim the applique fabric. Now, you want to trim it as close to the stitches as possible, because if you leave too much and you don't cut it close enough, then you're going to see that fabric sticking out of your stitches. So cut all the way up to the stitches if you can, just don't snip the stitches. Okay, and there we have it. And this I might try to trim that off a little bit more, because that might stick out of the stitches. All right, so next step, you're going to put it back in the machine for the next stitch. All right, so we're going to put it back in the machine. Just make sure everything is under your needle and presser foot there. Slide it in gently and place your lock down, and then straighten everything up. Make sure no fabric is stuck under the hoop or anything like that. And then we're ready for the next stitch. Now, the screen will show you what the next stitch is. All right, so unfortunately, I thought I hit record before stitching the next step, and I didn't. So you're just going to put your hoop back in your machine, straighten up your fabric, make sure nothing is underneath your hoop, and then stitch your next stitch. So for me, it was the snowman's hat. It stitched out a placement stitch here. So again, I'm going to take a piece of fabric and I'm going to put it under the needle. I'm not going to bother taking the hoop out because it's just a very tiny little space here. So I'm just going to make sure that the entire placement stitch is covered. Just rest my fabric on there, put my presser foot down, and then press go. Again, be very careful if you're going to put your fingers under here. And that's that. So the next step again is to trim. Once again, you do want to trim in between each step, because if I were to leave this here, then this fabric would be caught in the rest of my stitching, and I don't want it there. I just want it in the hat. So I'm going to go ahead and trim this black fabric, and then we'll be ready for the next stitch. All right, so our next stitch I can see on my screen here is going to be the snowman's arms. So since this is not a placement stitch, I'm going to actually change the color of my thread. And if you weren't sure what stitch was next because the screen is super small, what you can do is you can use your Embroidery software, or I'm sure whatever other software you're using, and you can press the button that simulates the stitches, meaning it will kind of stitch out the design on your screen. And you can just kind of go through and see where you left off and then see what's next. So that's another nice thing about having the software, is if you weren't sure what stitch was next based on your little screen, you can see it in your software there. All right, so needle down. I'm going to let this stitch out. Now, what I like to do when I change my thread, you can see I have a super long tail. I like to let it stitch a couple stitches and then stop it and trim that thread, because if I don't trim the thread now, it may get caught in another stitch. So I'm going to press go. I'm going to let it go a couple stitches. Have my scissors ready. And then when I think that the presser foot is out of the way enough, just stop it. I'm going to put the foot up just to get it out of my way a little bit, and then trim that. And that's another time when these curved scissors come in handy. It just helps you trim the threads a little bit easier. So I'm going to stitch the arms out and then move to the next step. All right, so from here on out, there's no more applique. It's just going to stitch the outside satin stitch, and then looks like the carrot nose and the 3 little buttons. So I'm not going to film the rest of this because it's just standard, you know, let your embroidery machine do its thing kind of. But I will come back at the end and show you what it looks like, and then show you what I do to finish this off. So I'll be back in a little bit. All right, so the embroidery is all finished. Here's what it looks like. So basically, you're just going to repeat the same steps you did for the first letter, or whatever you're appliquing, for the rest of your design, okay? Came out so cute and adorable. A couple last steps that we need to do. So we first want to clean this up a little bit by trimming any jump threads that didn't get trimmed, any threads sticking up, anything like that. So the curved embroidery scissors are great for that because of the curve. But I also use these sometimes. These are tiny little scissors by Kai, K-A-I. I will see if I can link them below. And they are extremely sharp. So these work in like 99% of the situations, but they're not as sharp. If there's a tiny little thread I can't get at with the curved scissors, I like to use these. Okay. And actually, I wanted to show you, if you could see this point here on the hat, there was, looks like a tiny little piece there. Let me, tiny little piece right there above the hat that I didn't trim off. Meaning I didn't trim the applique fabric close enough. So that's what will happen. This point, I don't think I could trim that anymore, just because it's so tacked down, and that's fine. I mean, you can't even really tell, but I wanted to show you, you know, what can happen if you don't trim your fabric close enough to your stitching. So you're just going to clean up, like I said, any jump threads, anything like that. And then sometimes I'll also take a lint roller after I've snipped all my threads on the front here, and just kind of lint roll it, because as you can maybe see, I don't know if the camera's really picking it up, but there's a lot of like little threads and stuff now. I don't have my lint roller handy, so I will do that later on. And then the final thing, well, actually before that, you're going to unhoop it, okay? So unscrew your hoop, pull it out, Now this stabilizer, remember, is cutaway. Okay, so what you're gonna do is I like to kind of separate the fabric from the stabilizer. Come in here from the side. Let's see if I could get a better view on this. Okay. And then I like to cut as close to the design as possible. But again, don't cut through your stitches, and be careful that you're not cutting your fabric, okay? So that's why I like to kind of hold it like this. I don't do it flat on a surface. And then as I go, just pull the fabric. So remember, we used that basting spray, so it's a little bit, it's stuck to the stabilizer. So I just kind of pull it, So I just kind of pull it, not hard at all, just enough so that I can get right up to, the stitches. Okay, and just do that all the way around. And I am cutting through all 3 layers of my stabilizer. Okay. So now that's what it looks like on the back. I could probably come in here with my scissors and cut out these. It's not even necessary, because what I'm going to do now as the final step is I'm going to put on this Tender Touch. It's by Sulky. And basically it's an iron-on stabilizer that it's kind of soft. So I put it on the back of all my embroidery, because this is going to touch, you know, my daughter's skin, and this helps it be not so like scratchy, I guess you would say. So there's a smooth side and a bumpy side. The bumpy side goes down. So what I like to do is just place this down and just kind of roughly measure how much I'm gonna need. And then cut a piece. And like I said, you don't want to trim really any of the threads on the back. I mean, something like this that's super long, I could trim it a little bit, but don't trim close to your embroidery, because that will loosen up your stitches. So this also helps to kind of seal those stitches down, so to speak. All right, so then I'm going to just trim this up a little bit. Lay it down so that the bumpy side is touching the embroidery, and then press it with my iron. So don't try to iron and like move your iron around. Just press and hold, press and hold, press and hold. I could bring you over to the iron, but I think you all know how to press. Okay, so follow your instructions on your stabilizer, but just press that, and then this is what it will look like from the back. And then you're finished. Thank you so much for watching. Please give this video a like, leave a comment, and hit that subscribe button. And until next time, bye!